The first sound wasn't the siren. It was the steady hum of tires on asphalt tourists winding north toward Yellowstone's Northern Gate windows, down to catch the smell of sage and pine. Then came the rising wail of a deputy's cruiser, urgent but not panicked, echoing off the Absaroka foothills. Drivers slowed, pulling onto gravel shoulders, raising little clouds of dust. In the center lane, small and stubborn, stood a grizzly bear cub. The cub wasn't panicked. Its paws shuffled on the warm blacktop claws, clicking faintly. It didn't bolt for the cottonwoods by the river, didn't clamber up the embankment toward the grazing cattle. It simply stood turning its head toward the sound of the siren, as if trying to decide whether this noise meant danger or help. For the deputies, the answer was automatic. They'd been trained to haze bears, especially cubs, off roadways. A siren here, an air horn, there sometimes the crack of a beanbag round. Most black bear cubs scatter like marbles at the first burst of sound. They climb the nearest tree or sprint across a field. Little streaks of fur disappearing as quickly as they appeared. A grizzly bear cub. Those not a black bear cub. Different species, different instincts, different history. Deputy Evans cracked the PA system. "Move it along, little guy." "Go on now." His voice echoed across the valley, half command, half plea. The cub huffed low and breathy and lowered its body slightly. That huff wasn't aggression. For anyone who spent time around wild animals, it was clear this was a contact call, a sound meant for another bear, its mother, most likely. But the road was empty, except for the cub, 2 sheriff's cruisers, and a handful of drivers who had pulled over to film with their phones. On the far side of the road, the flashing lights caught the attention of a German shepherd sitting inside the canine unit's SUV. His name was Rook. He pressed his nose to the metal great ears, flicking forward, eyes fixed on the cub. He didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He just watched, steady alert. Detective Lily Carter, Rook's handler, noticed the stillness. She knew his habits. Sirens usually unsettled him. He'd been through enough loud calls, domestic disputes, and gunshots in the last 3 years to carry his own kind of scars. But now he wasn't shaking or whining. He was riveted by the sight of the cub if he recognized something in its posture, its quiet refusal to run. And then there was Logan Pierce. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be up at a friend's ranch, patching fences, keeping his mind busy. Instead, caught in traffic, he found himself parked on the shoulder hands, gripping the steering wheel. His jaw was tight, but not from the heat. The sound of the siren carried him somewhere else, back to Kandahar 5 years ago. Dust storms, rotors chopping the air, voices calling orders through static. He blinked, shook his head. Not now, not here. But the tremor in his right hand betrayed him. He stepped out of the truck anyway. The air smelled of river mud and hot pavement. Tourists kept their distance, murmuring, filming. One whispered, "Cute animal videos always get the most likes." But this wasn't cute. This was a grizzly bear cub on Highway 89 where semis barreled through day and night. One wrong move, and the story would turn from curiosity to tragedy. Logan squinted at the cub. Something in its stance reminded him of men he'd known, standing ground, not out of strength, but out of confusion, not sure whether to retreat or fight, just frozen. He recognized that paralysis because he'd lived it. The deputies continued their hazing attempts. One hit the air horn. The blast sent a hawk flying from a fence post. The cub didn't move. It rocked back slightly, then planted itself again, gaze fixed on Rook. That was when Lily decided to step out. She clipped Rook's leash, gave him the short, calming command, "Heel." The dog obeyed, muscles taut, but steady. They walked toward the edge of the road, not directly at the cub, but on a diagonal body language, open calm. The cub chuffed again, softer this time. Tourists fell quiet. Even the deputies stopped talking for a moment. What they were watching wasn't a standoff, it was recognition. Here's where perspective matters. To many people, a cub on the road is a nuisance, a danger to drivers, a liability for the county. Maybe even an excuse to say bears and humans can't coexist. That thinking leads to quick fixes: chase it, cage it, relocate it, or worse. But coexistence is never about quick fixes. It's about understanding behavior, theirs and ours. This cub wasn't stubborn for no reason. It wasn't ignoring sirens because it was fearless. It was communicating. The problem was, most of us don't speak the language of wild animals. That's where examples help. Just last year near Glacier National Park, a subadult grizzly was hazed 3 times from a campground. Each time it returned. Officials later discovered its mother had been struck on a nearby road. The cub hadn't been defiant. It had been searching. Its instinct wasn't to flee. It was to stay where last contact had been made, hoping the mother would return. Hazing wasn't solving the problem because the cub wasn't misbehaving. It was grieving. Think about that. We often treat wildlife encounters as logistical puzzles: move the animal from point A to point B, prevent accidents, minimize headlines. But each animal has its own story, its own set of instincts shaped by history and experience. A grizzly bear cub, left alone by a lost mother, isn't just a wild animal. It's a living being in crisis. That's the small lesson Highway 89 was teaching in real time. Sirens and horns don't translate into the cub's world, but posture does, calm does, familiarity does. And for reasons nobody on that roadside could quite explain, yet the cub had locked on to Rook the German shepherd, who carried his own hidden wounds, as if the two recognized something in each other's silence. Lily read the signs carefully. Rook wasn't showing aggression. His ears were up, but relaxed tail, neutral body angled slightly sideways. A canine version of, "I'm not here to fight." The cub mirrored the posture in its own way, lowering its head, letting out a soft whine. If you knew how to watch, you could see 2 different species carrying on a conversation across the yellow line of the highway. Wildlife conflicts aren't always about dominance or fear. Sometimes they're about connection, strange as that sounds. 2 animals, one domesticated and one wild. Both, shaped by stress, recognize vulnerability in each other. That moment couldn't be measured by protocols or paperwork, but it mattered more than any siren blast. Sheriff Warren Cole stood behind his cruiser, arms folded. He'd been in law enforcement for 20 years, long enough to trust procedure. But even he had to admit this scene didn't look like a procedure. It looked like something else entirely. He muttered mostly to himself, "That's not a vagrant cub. That's something different." Tourists kept filming. Later clips would hit social media under hashtags like Bear Cub Wildlife Videos and Paradise Valley. But in that moment, the digital world didn't matter. What mattered was a cub who wouldn't move a canine, who wouldn't break eye contact, and a valley full of people who were about to learn that wildlife management is never as simple as pushing an animal off the road. Logan rubbed his hand against his jeans, trying to still the tremor. He felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt since before his last tour overseas, a flicker of purpose. He wasn't sure what it meant yet. All he knew was that he couldn't walk away. Not from the cub, not from the way Rook held steady, not from the story unfolding on this strip of highway. Sometimes the first chapter of a story doesn't announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it's just a dusty road, a line of stopped cars, and a cub standing where it shouldn't be. But if you look closer, you see the outlines of something larger, about trauma, about connection, about how communities choose to respond when the ordinary collides with the wild. And this was only the beginning, because if a cub is on the road, the real question is, where is its mother? And finding that answer would change everything for the people of Paradise Valley. The cruiser lights dimmed, but the valley stayed hushed. Lily Carter opened the back door of her unit and gave a short command. "Rook, heel." The German shepherd stepped out, shoulders squared, movements measured. For a moment, this paw froze on the gravel shoulder as the siren gave a final wail before fading out. His ear twitched, his jaw trembled almost imperceptibly, but then he caught sight of the cub and stilled himself. The grizzly bear cub had not moved from its stance in the road. It lowered its head slightly, a sound between a sigh and a whine escaping its chest. It wasn't the defensive roar most people expect when they think of wild animals. It was something more fragile, a sound cubs make when they are unsure searching. Rook answered not with a bark, but by tilting his head, ears perked forward. To anyone filming from a distance, it looked like curiosity, but Lily knew better. She'd watched her partner through countless calls. Loud bangs or sudden radio pops made him stiffen. The rattle of a helicopter often sent his tail, low eyes darting, until she grounded him with steady words. That's what canine trauma looks like, quiet cracks in a dog trained to look unshakable. In that still moment on Highway 89, those cracks aligned with the cubs' confusion, as if both had stumbled into a language only they could speak. People often assume animals don't carry scars. Yet the science of canine PTSD says otherwise. Military and police dogs exposed to repeated high-stress situations can develop hypervigilance, exaggerated startle responses, or compulsive behaviors. Loud noises don't fade from their memories. They lodge deep, surfacing when sirens or gunshots replay the moment. Some handlers learn to manage it. Others never see the signs until the dog breaks down in the field. That's why Rook's quiet stillness mattered. He wasn't suppressing fear. He was finding common ground with a creature equally unsettled. Logan Pierce saw it too. From his spot near the ditch, he had been fighting his own body. A pop from a deputy's handheld radio had sent his pulse racing. He'd rubbed his wrist where the tremor spread, grounding himself. Now he watched a German shepherd meet the gaze of a grizzly cub, both holding steady. Logan knew the feeling of recognizing pain in another's eyes. It was the same look he'd given men in combat outposts, wordless exchanges between people carrying burdens too heavy to name. That's the explanation many drivers missed. They saw a standoff, a bear cub refusing to move, a canine refusing to back down. But what was happening was communication. Bears read body language. Dogs do too. Sideways stances, head tilts, relaxed tails, all signals that de-escalate tension. Instead of dominance, both were offering a kind of truce. An example makes this clearer. In Alaska's Kenai Peninsula, rangers once documented a black bear cub approaching a husky sled team. Instead of a fight, both sides exchanged vocalizations, soft and uncertain. Biologists later explained it. Cubs sometimes seek social cues from other canines when isolated, because wolves in the ecosystem can act as both threat and model. What outsiders saw as strange was in fact an animal reaching for any semblance of order when its world had broken. Trauma doesn't always isolate. Sometimes it searches for mirrors. The cub, stripped of its mother's presence, found itself drawn to the shepherd's calm. The shepherd, scarred by too many loud calls, steadied himself by meeting the cub's gaze. In their separate wounds, they built a bridge. Tourists lowered their phones, whispering. One woman murmured, "It looks like they know each other." Another muttered, "Cute animals always calm people down," but it wasn't cuteness keeping the cub rooted in place. It was recognition. That's a fresh perspective we often miss. We assume wild animals only run or fight. But there's a middle path seeking connection when danger overwhelms. And that path sometimes reveals itself not between human and animal, but between animal and animal. Sheriff Warren Cole studied the scene with a frown. By training, he should have ordered Lily back into the cruiser, should have told her to pull Rook away and let wardens handle the cub. But even he hesitated. He'd seen confrontations spiral in seconds. Yet what he saw here was the opposite tension unwinding. His gut told him to let it play out, even if protocol said otherwise. The cub inched forward, one paw, sliding claws, scraping asphalt. Rook stayed rooted, eyes locked, tail low, but still. Lily gave a soft, steady, her palm open but relaxed. The cub chuffed again, then sat back, legs folding beneath it. That posture, rare for a cub in traffic, wasn't defiance. It was a surrender, a gesture of vulnerability. And in that vulnerable posture was a reminder. When faced with the unfamiliar, humans often default to force, lights, horns. But sometimes the better move is stillness. Animals know this. They test each other with silence before deciding whether to flee or fight. It's a skill humans have largely forgotten in our hurry to control. For Logan, the moment landed differently. Watching the cub lower itself, he felt something unclench in his chest. In Afghanistan, he'd seen villages go quiet before ambushes. Silence had always meant danger. Here, silence meant the opposite, the possibility of trust. His eyes stung, though he'd never admit it aloud. Rook shifted slightly, his body angling away, an intentional canine signal of no threat. The cub tilted its head in the mirror. A dialogue without words, just gestures carved by instinct. Lily recognized it immediately. She whispered, "They're talking." Nobody answered, but everyone heard. Why does this matter? Because it challenges a common mistake in wildlife encounters. Assuming louder is better. We rev engines, bang pots, yell at bears, thinking noise asserts control. But in situations where an animal is already overwhelmed, separated, distressed, confused, noise often backfires. It teaches the animal nothing. It only adds another layer of panic. Silence is a tool. Observation is a tool. Letting animals set the pace can yield safer outcomes than all the gadgets in a cruiser. The cub's reaction proved it. Instead of bolting into traffic or charging in fear, it sat, eyes steady, breathing in rhythm with a shepherd who'd also learned to live with ghosts. The crowd along Highway 89 felt it too. They weren't sure why, but something sacred hung in the air. A boy tugged on his mother's sleeve, whispering, "They're friends." She nodded, though she couldn't explain how or why. That whisper held a truth connection isn't always logical. Sometimes it's survival shaped by scars invisible to outsiders. The cub wasn't seeking food or comfort. It was seeking assurance that it wasn't alone in its fear. And in Rook it found that assurance. But the story doesn't end with recognition. Because if the cub is searching, the unanswered question remains searching for what cubs don't sit still by choice. They wait because something is missing. And in this valley, where the Yellowstone River bends and ranches line the ridges, the missing piece was obvious, a mother grizzly somewhere unseen, or perhaps no longer alive. That's the mystery, pulling the officers, the veteran, and the community forward. Rook steadied the cub for now, but the larger test was just beginning. And so, as the deputies shifted uncomfortably as Sheriff Cole weighed rules against instinct, as Logan steadied his trembling hand, the valley leaned into the unanswered. If a cub has chosen silence over flight, then the people of Paradise Valley must choose how to respond. And the next step meant leaving the asphalt and following the trail into the cottonwoods, where the truth about the mother bear and the town's own choices waited in shadow. The cub sat still on the highway, but its eyes kept darting toward the cottonwoods by the Yellowstone River. Every few minutes, it gave a low whine, soft and almost pleading. That was the clue somewhere nearby its mother had been, and the cub still expected her return. For Sheriff Warren Cole, this was no longer just a traffic hazard. It was an investigation. He pulled Lily aside. "We've got to find the sow. If she's dead, we have a bigger problem. If she's alive, we need to know where." He radioed for Fish, Wildlife and Parks, but the nearest officer was an hour away. They couldn't wait. Too many vehicles already crowded the shoulder tourists, whispering phones out, recording their own wildlife documentary. Logan Pierce stepped closer. "You'll need tracks," he said quietly. "I can help." Cole frowned. He didn't like civilians inserting themselves, but Lily nodded. Logan had the steady way of someone who knew how to move through terrain. And she noticed Rook leaning slightly toward him, as if the shepherd trusted him already. Against his instincts, Cole agreed. They started with the basics. Tracks on soft soil tell stories better than words. The deputies fanned out near the embankment, looking for impressions. Lily pointed to a set large prints, front paws nearly as wide as her hand. The claws marked deep. Adult grizzly, she confirmed. A second set, smaller, trailed beside likely the cubs. The trail led toward the cottonwoods. Logan crouched, tracing the edge of the print with his finger. He didn't say much, but his body tightened. His right hand shook the tremor he couldn't control. He clenched it against his thigh. For him, tracking was muscle memory from long patrols overseas, different soil, different species, but the same vigilance. Every snapped twig, every shadow once meant ambush. Now it meant something else, maybe a wounded mother bear. That's the explanation viewers often need. Grizzly families move together. Cubs under 2 years rarely stray from their mothers, and a cub alone almost always means distress. A healthy sow keeps her cubs tight to her side, teaching them food sources, guiding them away from danger. When that bond breaks, it's usually because of one of 3 things: injury, vehicle, collision, or human interference. 2 summers ago in Wyoming, a sow was struck by a pickup outside Cody. Her cubs lingered for hours near the roadside, confused, until wardens hazed them off. They returned the next day. Without intervention, they began approaching the ranch outbuildings, desperate for food and companionship. One was eventually captured and sent to a sanctuary. The other vanished. That case still haunts local officers, because every cub's fate carries weight not just for the animal, but for the community that must live alongside bears. Back in Paradise Valley, Logan and Lily followed the trail into the cottonwoods. Rook moved low nose, working the air. His ears flicked each time a crow called, but Lily kept her voice steady. "With me." Logan slowed when he saw barbed wire tangled near the riverbank. Tufts of brown hair clung to the fence. He touched it gently. "She came through here. Might be injured." They pushed further in, careful not to spook the cub that waited on the highway. Each sign pointed to stress claw marks on a cottonwood trunk, patches of soil torn where a large body had stumbled. Then silence. No fresh tracks leading back out. That silence carried its own kind of weight. For Lily, it triggered a memory, the unopened letter from her brother Noah she carried in her jacket. He'd written about working with military dogs, about how silence on patrol meant everything. She hadn't opened the letter yet, afraid of what truths it might hold. But here in the hush of the cottonwoods, the reminder pressed in silence often precedes revelation. When searching for wildlife, rushing guarantees failure. Loud voices, clumsy steps, those push animals deeper into hiding or worse, toward roads. Observation matters more than speed. Look for scat freshness. Listen for birds' alarm calling, and watch how the wind carries scent. In ecosystems like the Yellowstone corridor, predators and prey alike pay constant attention to sound and smell. Humans must do the same if they want to see without destroying. For Logan, that practice was familiar, but also dangerous. He slipped into dissociation, his mind flashing back to alleyways where silence meant insurgents waiting. His chest tightened. He rubbed the scar on his wrist, grounding himself. Lily noticed. She slowed her pace, giving him a glance that wasn't pity, just recognition. She'd seen the same look in Rook when a car backfired near the station. Trauma didn't vanish. It lingered in muscle and memory. That's the fresh perspective. People think wildlife investigations are purely about biology, but they're also about human psychology. Officers bring their own histories into the field, just as veterans like Logan bring theirs. The way we track, the way we read signs, it all carries the fingerprints of past experiences. Recognizing that helps us approach with humility. They found no sign of the sow returning. The trail ended in crushed reeds by the river, blood flecked faintly on the leaves. Lily crouched. She's hurt. Badly. Cole pressed his lips thin. If she's down somewhere near ranchland, we're in trouble. Injured grizzlies are unpredictable, desperate, and that meant risk for everyone in the valley. Back on the road, the cub shifted uneasily, pacing in a small circle. It still looked toward the cottonwoods, expecting its mother to emerge. Tourists murmured nervously, sensing the tension. One boy asked his father, "Where's the mama bear?" The man shrugged. "Filming anyway." That gap between curiosity and responsibility is where communities often falter. When an animal's family bond breaks, human choices fill the void. Do we haze the cub until it disappears, hoping it survives alone? Do we capture and relocate knowing rehab centers are full? Or do we step back, let nature take its course, and risk suffering in silence? None of the answers is simple. Sheriff Cole called the group back. "We'll need cameras here tonight. If the sow's still alive, we'll catch her moving." Logan volunteered to help set them. His voice was steady now, anchored by purpose. Rook leaned against his leg briefly, a subtle gesture of trust. That moment mattered more than the cameras. A veteran finding steadiness, a dog finding reassurance, a cub waiting for what might never return, all threads weaving into one story. The search for the sow wasn't just about tracking paw prints. It was about how people choose to respond when faced with loss in the wild. As the sun dipped toward the ridges, Cole looked back at the cub. "We don't have long. Tomorrow decides everything." His words carried a weight the whole valley felt. Because the search for the sow wasn't just about whether a mother grizzly lived or died. It was about policy compassion and the choices a community would make under pressure. And those choices would be tested sooner than anyone expected. By dusk, the cub had curled itself into a ball on the gravel shoulder nose, tucked under one paw. Drivers slowed, snapping photos. Deputies kept their distance, waiting for orders. The sow had not returned. In wildlife management, that absence starts a clock ticking. Sheriff Warren Cole leaned against his cruiser radio in hand, listening to the Fish, Wildlife and Parks dispatcher. The voice on the other end was flat official. "Protocol is clear. If the sow hasn't reappeared by morning, capture the cub. Evaluate. If no rehab slot is open, euthanasia is permitted." Cole repeated the words under his breath, as though saying them aloud might make them sound less brutal. Euthanasia. Permitted. He looked at the cub, its tiny chest rising and falling. The words felt heavier than his badge. Lily Carter heard too. She clenched Rook's leash tighter. She'd read those policies before. They weren't written with malice. They were written for efficiency. Reduce risk, save money, minimize headlines. But efficiency doesn't account for the weight of a living being's eyes. Here's the explanation viewers often miss. Wildlife agencies walk a tightrope. On one side, protecting ecosystems. On the other hand, protecting taxpayers' dollars and human safety. Every orphaned cub represents cost. Rehab centers charge thousands for care, and success isn't guaranteed. Release rates vary, and survival post-release varies even more. To agencies balancing budgets, tough calls get codified into standard procedure. But standard procedure can erase nuance. Every cub is different. Every case has context. Yet paperwork flattens all into the same line: capture, evaluate, relocate, or end. In Alaska, a pair of orphaned grizzly cubs were captured after their mother was shot for raiding chicken coops. One cub thrived in rehab, learned to forage, and was released successfully. The other, more traumatized, fixated on human contact and never adjusted. That cub ended up in a zoo. The agency called the decision practical, but to locals who had watched the cubs play in the meadow, practical felt like betrayal. Policies protect institutions, but they rarely comfort communities. People don't remember the spreadsheets. They remember the cub they saw on their road, the animal that seemed almost to ask for help. Logan Pierce listened quietly as Cole relayed the policy. His hands tightened into fists, not out of anger, but recognition. Standard procedure had been the language of his past, too. In Afghanistan, protocols dictated which convoys rolled, which villages were protected, and which weren't. Those rules made sense on paper. In practice, they left families broken men carrying scars. He knew the phrase, well, acceptable loss, and he knew how it tasted bitter. This is the fresh perspective. Policies are made for averages, but lives aren't averages. They're singular. A grizzly bear cub sitting on a Montana highway isn't a statistic. It's a test of whether we see beyond the policy cliff. Cole sighed. Folks will want answers. They'll ask why we didn't save it if we can. Lily's voice cracked. Because the files said no room. She shook her head. That's not good enough. Here's where history matters. In Vietnam, military working dogs were classified as equipment. Many were left behind when troops withdrew, written off as surplus. It took decades of outcry before the U.S. government changed the classification, recognizing dogs as partners, not tools. That shift happened because people refused to accept standard procedure. So, what does that mean for Paradise Valley tonight? It means the cub's fate isn't only about biology. It's about what kind of community people want to be. Do they default to paperwork, or do they insist on compassion that policies haven't yet caught up to? An older rancher leaning on the hood of his truck muttered to anyone listening, "If we don't step up, we'll regret it. Ain't no spreadsheet can tell us what's right." His words carried the grit of someone who had buried livestock, fixed fences, and still believed coexistence wasn't impossible. When standard procedure feels like a cliff edge, communities have to build their own bridge. That might mean funding rehab, privately pressuring agencies, or creating sanctuaries. It doesn't mean ignoring risk. It means refusing to equate efficiency with morality. The cub stirred, lifting its head at the sound of a crow. It gave a soft call, almost hopeful. Rook shifted beside Lily, ears flicking. The shepherd had his own scars from sirens and gunfire, but even he seemed to understand the stakes. Lives aren't disposable, no matter how policies frame them. Cole closed the radio. "Tomorrow," he said. "We'll decide tomorrow." He didn't say more, but the whole valley felt the weight. The mystery remained unresolved. Was the sow alive, wounded somewhere in the cottonwoods? Or was the cub already orphaned its fate in the hands of procedure? Either way, morning would bring confrontation not just with a policy manual, but with conscience. And that confrontation wouldn't be fought in silence. The town itself would soon have its say. Morning light crept into Paradise Valley, pale against the cottonwoods. The cub was still near the road, pacing now, calling more often. Its thin voice reached across the ditch and into people's nerves. They all knew what it meant. Hunger, loneliness, waiting. Inside her cruiser, Lily Carter sat with a folded envelope in her lap. The paper was creased at the corners and the writing faded. She had carried it for years, but had never read it. The letter was from her brother Noah, written before his last deployment overseas. She'd kept it sealed, afraid that opening it would make the loss final. But last night, after hearing the dispatcher's flat words about standard procedure, she felt something shift. The cub's cries had unlocked something she had been holding back. She broke the seal. The words came alive in Noah's careful handwriting. "Lil, if you're reading this, I probably didn't get the chance to tell you in person. Don't be angry. I want you to know why I work with these dogs. They don't judge, they don't lie, they don't quit. They give courage back in tiny pieces. And I think one day you'll work with one too." Her throat tightened. She looked at Rook lying at her feet, the shepherd's chest rising steadily, his eyes alert but soft. He had given her courage in pieces, just as Noah predicted. She whispered, "You were right, Noah. You were right." Logan Pierce leaned against the cruiser nearby, noticing the way she wiped her eyes. He didn't intrude. He knew what it meant to hold on to ghosts. His own came in flashes, faces of soldiers, lost the thud of rotors, the silence afterward. He carried no letters, just fragments. But he recognized the weight of what she was holding now. Here's the explanation many overlook. Grief doesn't move in straight lines. It loops, stalls, hides. People carry unopened letters, empty uniforms, and photos tucked away in drawers. Animals do it too. Cubs pacing roadsides, dogs whining at doors that no longer open. Trauma echoes across species. The difference is that animals show it plainly, while humans disguise it under routine. A study of orphaned elephants in Kenya found calves returned repeatedly to the last place they saw their mothers lingering, as if expecting them back. They showed signs of stress, loss of appetite, restlessness, mirroring human mourning behaviors. What scientists call attachment looks very much like grief. It's not only a human story. That's the small lesson the cub and Rook were teaching on Highway 89. Bonds cross species. They don't vanish with absence. They leave impressions that shape every decision after. Lily's unopened letter was one kind of imprint. The cub's refusal to leave the road was another. Both spoke the same truth: love doesn't end when life does. The crowd along the highway began to murmur again. Word had spread overnight. More locals had come. Some wanted to help. Some just wanted to watch. A rancher argued that keeping the cub alive would draw more bears near cattle. A teacher said her students had been tracking prints all spring. Killing the cub would betray the lesson she tried to instill about stewardship. Voices rose, competing, clashing. Lily folded Noah's letter and stood. "We're missing the point," she said quietly but firmly. "This isn't about policy alone. It's about bonds. My brother knew that. He trusted dogs to save lives because of the loyalty they carry. And I think this cub is showing the same loyalty. It's waiting for someone who may never come back." Silence settled over the group. Even Cole, who usually spoke with authority, let her words hang. Logan added softly, "Sometimes the ones left behind just need someone else to carry the weight." His hand trembled, but his voice didn't. That's the fresh perspective. We tend to separate human stories from animal stories, but they aren't separate at all. They reflect each other. Soldiers and dogs form partnerships that outlast war. Cubs and sows share bonds that outlast safety. Communities and their landscapes are woven together the same way. Breaking those bonds hurts more than individuals, it damages the whole fabric. The cub pawed at the asphalt, whining again. Rook lifted his head ears forward, then let out a low whine of his own. Two voices, one wild, one domestic, overlapping in tone. Lily closed her eyes. "They're talking to each other," she whispered. That moment pressed a choice onto everyone watching. Do they treat the cub as a number in a file or as a bond worth honoring? The answer would shape not just this bear's life, but the community's sense of itself. Grief and loyalty can drive better decisions than fear or efficiency. When we recognize bonds in people and animals, we find reasons to choose compassion over convenience. Cole finally spoke. "We can't ignore what we've seen. This cub isn't just another case file, and our town isn't just another dot on the map. If we want to live with these animals, we have to stand for them." He looked at the ranchers, the teacher, the deputies. "That means tonight we meet. We talk it out. Everyone gets a say." The crowd shifted, murmurs of agreement rising. For once, the debate didn't splinter into sides. For once, they were willing to sit down and wrestle with the harder questions. And so, as the sun climbed higher, the valley braced for a gathering that would test more than wildlife policy. It would test whether a community built on cattle tourists and open land could find common ground around a single cub, and around the wounds each of them carried, seen and unseen, because grief had spoken. Now leadership had to answer. By late afternoon, folding chairs filled the Paradise Valley Fire Hall. The cub still lingered on the roadside, guarded by deputies, but here the real battle was unfolding. Neighbors, ranchers, teachers, guides, and veterans squeezed into the hall, waiting for Sheriff Warren Cole to speak. Cole stood at the front, hat in hand. He wasn't a man who liked speeches. For most of his career, he had relied on procedure. Do what the handbook says. Stay out of controversy. Keep the peace. But now the handbook had told him to sign off on something that didn't sit right. And the valley was looking at him, not just as an enforcer of rules, but as a leader. He cleared his throat. "We've all seen the cub. We've all heard the policy. Capture if possible, euthanize if no room. That's the state's line. But I need to hear what this community believes before I decide what to enforce." That invitation surprised many. Cole wasn't known for asking, but something had shifted in him since watching Lily and Rook with the cub. For the first time, he had felt that policies alone weren't enough. Here's the explanation worth pausing on. Leadership often begins in suspicion. Cole had suspected Logan of meddling where he didn't belong. He had suspected Lily of letting emotion cloud her judgment. He had suspected the cub itself of being a nuisance that might one day raid trash cans. Suspicion is the default stance of those sworn to protect order. But suspicion cannot carry a community forward. Stewardship can. Voices rose from the crowd. A rancher spoke first. "That cub's cute now, but in a year it'll be breaking fences. My family's lost calves before." A fishing guide countered. "And if we kill it, what do we tell tourists who come here to see wild animals? They don't pay to see empty fields." A teacher raised her hand. My students tracked that sow and cub this spring. They drew maps of their path. If the cub disappears, they'll ask me why. What do I tell them? That convenience mattered more than care? Examples poured out. A veteran in the back recalled how in Vietnam, dogs had been left behind as equipment. The regret never left him. We called it policy, but policy never looked you in the eye. That cub did. That's the small lesson. Communities aren't moved by statistics. They're moved by stories. Numbers don't stir hearts, but bonds do. One family remembered seeing the sow last month near their irrigation ditch. Another recalled how the cub had startled at a thunderclap, reminding them of their own dog during fireworks. In those details, people began to connect their own lives with the bears. Logan finally spoke. His hand trembled as he held the microphone, but his voice carried. I know what standard procedure feels like when it writes you off as expendable. I lost men because someone far away decided they were acceptable losses. I can't watch it happen again, not to a cub, not in this valley. We can choose better. The room quieted. For a veteran to speak about loss in public was no small act. His words hit harder than any data sheet. Cole listened, arms folded. The weight of leadership pressed heavily, but something in him softened. He remembered the cub sitting on the highway, eyes fixed on Rook. He remembered Lily reading her brother's letter aloud. He remembered his own years of service when he too had once believed leadership meant more than just following orders. Here's the fresh perspective. Stewardship isn't about choosing between people and animals. It's about recognizing they share the same landscape, the same vulnerabilities. Protecting one doesn't mean abandoning the other. True leadership is weaving both into the same fabric. Cole stepped forward. I came in here ready to enforce a policy. But what I've heard tonight is more than a complaint. It's conviction. This community wants to stand for life even when the state says no. So here's my choice. We'll protect the cub until a real solution is found. We'll call on rehab centers, sanctuaries, whoever it takes. And if the state disagrees, they can take it up with me. Applause rose hesitant at first, then stronger. The rancher who had complained nodded slowly, not fully convinced, but respecting Cole's stand. The teacher wiped her eyes. The veteran sat straighter as if a weight had lifted. That's the takeaway. Suspicion may guard against risk, but stewardship builds trust. A leader who listens, who chooses compassion when rules fall short, gives a community courage to do the same. Outside the hall, dusk fell. The cub lifted its head again, giving a plaintive call into the cottonwoods. Rook answered with a soft whine. Two voices across species, still reaching, and in that sound lay the mystery. Unresolved, was the sow still alive, waiting somewhere unseen? Or had the cub already become an orphan the valley must carry? Either way, the search was not over. The next step would take them off the pavement and into the wild, where answers waited in shadows and the risks were greater than ever. The morning after the town hall, Paradise Valley woke to a quiet urgency. The cub had moved from the highway into the edge of the cottonwoods, still calling waiting. Sheriff Cole gathered a small team Lily with Rook Logan, 2 deputies, and a state biologist who had driven in overnight. The mission search Pine Creek, find the sow, and decide the cub's fate. They moved carefully through the fields, boots damp with dew. Logan walked at the rear, scanning instinctively, his eyes darting to shadows, his hand twitching whenever the radios crackled. The tremor in his wrist betrayed nerves, but he steadied himself by focusing on details, claw marks on bark, tufts of hair on barbed wire, the way grass bent in one direction. His training had taught him that survival lay in noticing what others overlooked. Rook padded beside Lily, body tense but responsive. Each time a crow cried overhead, his ears flicked. At the sound of a distant gunshot from a ranch, he froze, tail low, breath quick. PTSD in dogs often looks like this, hyper-alert, startled by echoes of past trauma. Lily crouched, touching his shoulder, whispering steady words. Rook's breathing slowed. He pressed against her leg, grounding himself, and they moved on. Even in the field, healing happened moment by moment. Here's the explanation worth pausing on. Field rescues follow a set of tactics approach with the wind in your favor. Minimize noise and avoid sudden movements. Bears trust their noses more than their eyes, so teams stay downwind. Officers often split into two groups, one to monitor, one to act. The goal isn't confrontation, it's containment without panic. They found the sow near the creek bed. She had collapsed in willows tangled in fencing wire, her flank matted with blood. Still alive, but barely. The cub's calls had been real communication. It knew its mother was near. The deputies froze. Even wounded, a grizzly sow is dangerous. The biologist prepared a dart rifle, waiting for a clear shot. Cole whispered, "Steady." No sudden moves. The dart struck cleanly. The sow stirred, bellowed weakly, then slumped as the sedative took hold. The team rushed in. Logan cut the barbed wire with pliers, hands steady despite the tremor. Lily checked the sow's breathing, her glove rising and falling with each shallow breath. Rook whined, low ears flat, but stayed at heel. The rescue was only the first step. The biologist explained the reality: the sow would need veterinary care and the cub would have to be separated temporarily. Rehab isn't a fairy tale. Cubs must be fed without human bonding, taught to forage naturally, and released only when strong enough. Many never make it. Some learn to associate humans with food and can't return safely. Success requires patience, resources, and often luck. An example makes it clearer. In Montana, a pair of orphaned grizzly cubs once spent months in rehab, eating natural diets, climbing logs, and avoiding human contact. When released, one thrived, ranging into the high country. The other returned repeatedly to roadsides, drawn to easy food. That cub was euthanized after multiple incidents. The difference lay in subtle behaviors during rehab, small things with life or death consequences. Saving a cub isn't just about catching it. It's about teaching it to be wild again. That requires discipline not only from rehab staff, but from communities who must resist treating rescued animals like pets or mascots. Compassion without restraint can do more harm than good. Logan watched as the team lifted the sedated sow into a sling. For him, the scene carried echoes. In Afghanistan, he had carried wounded men from rubble, unsure if they'd survive. The same helpless weight pressed on him now. But this time there was no order to pull back. No policy saying the life wasn't worth saving. This time the choice was theirs. That difference mattered. And that's the fresh perspective. Rescue work isn't just about animals. It's about reclaiming something in ourselves. When we choose to carry instead of abandon, we rewrite what survival means for them and for us. Back at the highway, the cub spotted the sling being lifted onto a truck. It cried, pacing frantically until Lily knelt with Rook. The shepherd let out a soft whine, his head tilted, body angled in calm reassurance. The cub froze, then quieted as if trusting that this disruption was part of the path back to safety. The convoy moved slowly toward town, dust rising. Behind them, questions followed. Would the sow survive surgery? Would the cub adapt to rehab? Would the state support the valley's choice or punish it for defying procedure? None of those answers was certain, but in that uncertainty lay something powerful. For once, Paradise Valley had chosen action rooted in compassion, not policy. For once, a veteran, a sheriff, a detective, a community, and a cub had stood on the same side of the line. Risk doesn't vanish when we choose care, but meaning grows. Even failed rescues teach us that we didn't turn away. And sometimes that difference is what keeps communities whole. As the convoy disappeared into the horizon, Cole muttered, "We'll answer for this one way or another." His words weren't defeat, they were acceptance of the cost of stewardship. And the mystery still lingered. Would the sow recover? Would the cub relearn the wild? Would the valley's stand ripple beyond its borders, reshaping how other towns respond when procedure collides with conscience? Those questions waited in the future. For now, Paradise Valley had done its part. The next chapter would unfold not in fields or cottonwoods, but in policy rooms, news stories, and the quiet choices of ordinary people deciding whether to stand or to turn away. Snow had settled on the ridges above Paradise Valley, softening the scars left by fire and fence lines. 6 months had passed since the cub was pulled from Highway 89 and the sow was lifted from the willows of Pine Creek. Much had changed in that short time, though some truths still pressed hard against the valley's conscience. The sow survived her surgery. She bore a scar across her flank, but she healed enough to walk again. The biologists fitted her with a GPS collar and released her back into the Absaroka foothills. The cub, after months in rehab, learned to forage on pine nuts and dig for roots without human help. When the time came, the two were reunited in a holding pen, then released together into a stretch of wilderness far from roads and ranches. Locals still tell the story of how the cub pressed close against its mother before stepping into the timber, both moving uphill until they vanished. But the rescue wasn't just about bears. It left marks on the people too. Sheriff Warren Cole became more than a lawman. He helped push through a county program that funded bear-resistant dumpsters and electric fencing for ranchers. He still wore his badge, but when he spoke now, it wasn't only about law, it was about stewardship. People noticed. Some said he became slower to judge, quicker to listen. Lily Carter stayed with Rook, but she also started something new. With support from the state, she built a training protocol for canine units to recognize signs of canine PTSD. Departments across Montana requested copies. She kept Noah's letter framed in her office, a daily reminder that bonds between siblings, between handlers and dogs, shape the way people serve. And Logan Pierce, the veteran who once trembled at radio crackles, found steadier ground. He took work helping ranchers install fencing that kept wildlife out without harming it. His hands still shook sometimes, but less often. Nights were quieter. He no longer spoke of Afghanistan much, but when he did, it wasn't only about ghosts. It was about purpose. He told people, that cub gave me something to carry that wasn't grief. Here's the explanation viewers might want. Rescue operations like this don't rewrite entire systems overnight. State policies remain cautious. Rehab centers are still stretched thin. Funding is still contested. But what shifted in Paradise Valley was perspective. A single cub forced a community to ask, should procedure decide, life or should conscience? That question rippled outward, reaching newspapers, then legislators. 6 months later, lawmakers debated expanding capacity for orphaned cubs. Nothing final yet, but the seed was planted. An example proves how these ripples matter. Years ago, one black bear cub in Colorado was spared from euthanasia because a town demanded a rehab alternative. That decision led to the state's first formal cub rehab partnership, which now handles dozens of cases each year. Change began with one animal and one community unwilling to accept no. That's the lesson. What looks small, a cub on a roadside, a scar on a dog, a letter in a jacket, can open doors to wider change. Compassion rarely begins with policy. It begins with people who refuse to look away. The knowledge that sticks is simple but profound. Wild animals like grizzly bears are not just statistics in a population chart. They are individuals with instincts, bonds, and voices. Working dogs are not just tools in uniform. They can carry trauma, memory, and loyalty as deeply as humans. Communities are not just clusters of households. They are the choices people make together in moments of pressure. And the emotions remain raw. The cub's cries still echo in memory. Rook's quiet whine in answer still feels like a thread tying one species to another. Noah's words in his letter still ring in Lily's ears. They give courage back in tiny pieces. Those pieces built something whole again, not perfect, but whole enough to stand. Second chances are never guaranteed, but they're always worth the risk. The sow might have died from her wounds. The cub might have failed. Rehab. The community might have fractured over conflict. Yet they tried. And in the trying, they discovered something vital, that compassion and courage often walk hand in hand. What didn't change? The valley is still ranch country. Grizzly bears still roam where cattle graze. Conflict still exists, and it always will. But what did change is the way people respond. Now, when drivers spot a bear near the road, they slow down, call it in, and keep their distance. Ranchers test new fencing rather than reaching for rifles first. Kids at school draw maps of bear tracks and talk about neighbors on four legs. These aren't miracles. They are shifts, small, steady, powerful. The takeaway is one you can carry beyond Paradise Valley. When faced with a choice between what's efficient and what's compassionate, remember the cub and the canine. Efficiency saves time. Compassion saves meaning. One keeps order, the other keeps us human. So, where does that leave you? Maybe you faced your own policy? Cliff a moment when rules or routines told you to look away, but your heart told you to step forward. Maybe you've carried grief or watched someone else carry it and wondered if there was a bridge back to courage. The story of a cub, a dog, a veteran, and a town reminds us that bridges exist. They're built when we choose not to turn away. What moment in this story spoke most to you? Was it the cub's cry on the roadside, or Rook's calm gaze, Lily's letter, or Logan's trembling hands finding purpose again? Think about the times in your own life when you've had to choose between suspicion and stewardship, between efficiency and compassion. Those choices shape not only who we are, but who we become together. If this story gave you something to carry, a lesson, a perspective, or even just a pause to feel, then stay with us. Like this video, subscribe, and share your reflections in the comments. Your voice matters here just as much as the Cubs did on Highway 89.